Today's video is all about Timbaland. I'm going to be covering 3 production techniques that he uses in his beats.
Face, chubby waist, thick legs in shape, rump shaking both ways, make you do a double take. Planet rocker, showstopper, flow proper, head knocker, beat scholar, tail drop.
In my opinion, I think Timbaland is probably the most successful producer to come out of hip-hop. His style and sound is just so unusual, and yet he's still able to bring his sound to the mainstream. Personally, I just think that's really impressive, and so I want to cover a few ideas that are common in his beats so that maybe you can think about using them in your own production. And by the way, if you find yourself enjoying my videos, think about subscribing. It's really easy to unsubscribe if you ever get tired of my videos. It really does help me out though. So you heard the beat in the intro. This video is meant to cover that earlier 2000 style of Timbaland's production. Now, one concept that really jumped out to me has to do with his sampling technique. A lot of the time when we use samples and loops, often our objective is to chop it up and rearrange it, but still keep our creation sounding cohesive and fluid. But a lot of the time with Timbaland's production, his sampling technique doesn't really take that into consideration, and he goes a completely different way. For example, if we take a listen to the sample that I used for this beat here, now, instead of taking this sample and chopping it up and creating a very smooth loop where the pieces flow into one another seamlessly, you can see what I did here instead. Now with this loop, we have a very different approach here. There's very little fluidity, and it's not meant to sound smooth. You can even see parts of this loop where we have nothing playing at all. We just have these large gaps in between each of these chops. And again, this might be something that feels foreign to many beat makers, myself included. Since we typically use our sample as the centerpiece of our beat, we may automatically try to use our sample to fill up as much space as possible. But here we have a very different approach. I actually made another beat that also uses some of Timbaland's production ideas, though my course members mentioned that they prefer this one. The top of your booty jiggling out your jeans, baby, pull your pants up. I like it when I see you do it better than I've ever seen it done before. A lot of women drop it to the ground, but how low can you go? Lower than your mama's ever seen it in a lifetime. Never would have imagined it, not even in her right mind. Practice in front of that mirror, now you doing. And as you can see, we have a very similar idea here with my 3 sample layers right here. There are huge gaps in between these different chops, and there are times when nothing is playing at all. And in listening to a lot of Timbaland's production, it seems like he seeks out parts of the sample that are a bit more stabby. He almost takes a one-shot type of approach to sampling. And a lot of the time when we're looking for samples, we all might look for that nice big loop or a longer phrase to make a beat out of. But with Timbaland's style of sampling, it almost seems like he's more interested in taking smaller sections and finding little one-shots or shorter phrases to piece them together like this. But this is easier said than done. In order to pull this style off, we really need to cover an associated idea, which is using percussion to make the beat feel complete. Timbaland is famous for using eccentric sounds and textures to create percussive elements in his beats, ranging from sounds of different creatures and critters to using his own mouth. This is something I've talked about in my older videos where I discuss different ways to make your beats sound more full. That's linked right above my head. But I think another really important concept to understand with this style of sampling is that this approach to percussion almost becomes necessary. When we consider the idea that with this sampling style, there are just a lot more gaps and open areas where we have parts of the beat where absolutely nothing is happening at all, we'll still need to fill these spaces up somehow, some way. And so if I were to just come up with a boring, straightforward hi-hat pattern that was on every 8th step as a means of creating my rhythm in the beat, this would probably start to sound incomplete. The fact that Timbaland uses such unique sounds but also programs them in a way where we have various rhythms playing throughout one loop is one of the contributing factors to why I think this production style works. So in this beat here, you can see I'm using multiple different sounds ranging from hi-hats to shakers. I even use this vocal sample right here.
Shut your eyes.
But what I did was I controlled the shape of it so it starts to sound a lot more percussive when I actually use it. But what's also really important is to take a look at the different rhythms that I've created. I have different sounds playing at different times throughout this entire loop. And I'm also programming them to have different rhythms. This hi-hat layer here has a pretty straightforward placement in terms of its rhythm. But with this shaker layer right here, we have a completely different rhythm playing at a different time during the loop. So using multiple different percussive layers with multiple different rhythms playing at different times in your loop can be a great way of making your beat sound a lot more full. But again, this works and it sounds balanced largely due to the way that the loop is built, like I mentioned in the first tip. So if you have a very dense sample or loop that's playing all the time, you might want to stay away from this technique. And lastly, the final technique that I want to talk about has to do with repitching. This is a technique that you can hear in many of his beats where he uses the same chop but at multiple different pitches in order to create his loop. This is a technique that you can use to help you create something more melodic using samples. So for example, here is the beat to Oops Oh My by Tweet. This is probably one of my favorite beats of all time. Here is the main loop. You can hear at the end of this loop, he creates a little switch up where the vocalist sounds like she's singing different notes compared to the beginning of the loop. But what's interesting is that this chop here and this chop here are actually the exact same chops. He just pitched this one down 5 semitones. So using the exact same sample but repitching it to play multiple different notes can help you create more usable pieces, and you can use these additional pieces to build out a more robust loop that has more notes and in turn create something more melodic. And you can see I did something similar in this beat that I built where I had this bass step from the exact same sample as I showed you prior. And you can see I treated it like an instrument. I played it at multiple different pitches in order to create this melodic layer in my beat. And for those of you that watched my video on Madlib's production techniques, you'll remember seeing me do something very similar in that video as well. So if you've built your loop using a sample but you feel melodically speaking there isn't enough happening, don't be afraid to isolate specific notes from your sample and repitch them in order to introduce some additional notes that you can use to create something more robust and melodic. Now this video talked a lot about sampling, which might be something that you're not experienced at doing. So if you want to learn some more advanced techniques, I do have some videos on sampling. I will link one of them on the screen right now. If you're interested, it should be showing up. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If so, like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com if you want to check out my full online beatmaking course. The link to my free drum kit's available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord if you want to join my producer community. And I'll see you guys next time.